is coming on up. Very popular one. No, it's not the one. No.
The albatross too.
Oh yeah, there's albatross too. Okay, our second one, panel system coming up. March 28th, Armstrong Woods. Really nice chance to get off campus and commute with nature a little bit. So please go ahead and do that. You can do that on March 28th. You'll need tickets ahead of time. You can get them at the box office. So if you want to do that, do it quickly. First come, first served. It's $5. $5. Thanks, Ryan. Okay, and then today we do have a roundtable 4 p.m. in the room for today's speaker. So today's speaker is Dr. Robert Girlings. He's a professor in School of Business and Economics. Why did we invite him? Because he's an expert on sustainable enterprise. In other words, he thinks a lot about what would make a good company, okay, in terms of the environment and sustaining communities and all of those other things that we like companies to think about. He's thought a lot about what makes a good company. He also has a lot of experience consulting in other countries on sustainable development. Okay, so you're working on your different countries. We're hoping that he can give you a little bit different perspective on companies and development in other countries, and give you some information that you can do in your class. Please do continue to write questions on the index card. It's going really well. We'd love to see more questions, so please write those down, and let's give our speaker a warm FYU moment.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here. I normally don't have quite as many students in my class as I teach in the MBA program or graduating seniors in the business school, so I normally don't have more than about 25 students in a class. So this is a nice experience to talk to so many of you. I'm going to talk a little bit about the kinds of companies that I've been studying over the last 20 years. But let me tell you a little bit about how I got there. You know, my life has been a journey around the world. I started in Jamaica in the West Indies. How many of you have been to Jamaica? Anyone? Okay, a couple people. So yeah, my family actually goes back about 250 years in Jamaica. And according to one of my cousins, we're descendants of the Jewish pirates of the Caribbean, but I have been unable to verify that. Anyway, in 1974, I was working for the government of Jamaica. I went back after I did my doctorate and worked for the government as deputy director of regional planning. And I was responsible for a public works program, which ultimately employed about 15,000 people, and in an attempt to reduce the 18% unemployment rate in Jamaica. I don't think I was very successful. I think the unemployment rate is still 18%. But anyway, at that time, a cousin of mine wrote to me. They were living in Canada, and they said, "What are you doing about the environment?" And so I really started thinking, well, we weren't doing a whole lot. At that time, you know, I went snorkeling and could see the beautiful coral reefs off the coast. But at that time, they started to build all these hotels, were springing up everywhere. And so pollution started to creep into the sea and destroy the environment, and I started really thinking more deeply about these issues. When I came to Sonoma State and started teaching in the business school, I then started really concerning myself, are all the companies in the world destroying the planet, or are there some that are doing good things? And so I set about trying to find out about that, and today I'm beginning to see that there are many businesses and business leaders who are trying to make the world a better place to live in. But before I get into those good companies, I want to talk a little bit about the challenges that we face in the planet today. And this relates directly to the reading that you had for this week on globalization and free trade. I mean, the article's on free trade and the kind of issues in the global economy. I also teach a class in Introduction to International Business, and so I cover a lot of this material in that class. So there are a number of challenges that we face. Perhaps the foremost is population growth. Many of us feel that there are way too many people on the planet. We perhaps don't see it so much here in California, but if you go to LA, you certainly notice it down there. I was in Hawaii last week, and I noticed what the planet should be like. So there's the population issue, the social issue, and that's discussed in that article about the enormous inequality that's taking place. Today, the inequality in the United States is at the same level as it was in 1929 before the Great Crash. And one article I looked at that just came out suggests that it's even worse than it was during the time of the Roman Empire. So the wealth that is controlled by the upper 1% and even the 1% of the 1% is vast. Approximately 1% of the population controls as much wealth as the bottom 50%. Climate change is an issue that your generation will have to deal with. We're beginning to see the elements of it now, the conditions that we have here in terms of the drought. And we're putting on a conference April 29th, 30th, April 30th, May 1st and May 2nd, which is the Sustainable Enterprise Conference. And on the 2nd, the Saturday, is a youth summit, and I'd like to invite you all to attend that. That'll be at Sonoma Mountain Village, and deal with how do we deal with these issues of climate change and the resource shortages that we're facing. So here's a little bit of data for you. 2 billion people living on less than $2 a day. Anyone try to live on $2 a day? Pretty hard to do almost anywhere in the world. The access to electricity is an enormous issue in many parts of the world, particularly Africa. If you take a look at a map, if you look at the world from outer space, you'll see that there's lots of lights everywhere, but the entire continent of Africa has very little lights. Transportation, how do people get around? In the 1990s, I taught for a couple of years in Brazil, and my classes started at 8 o'clock on Monday mornings and ran until 12. So at 8 o'clock, there'd be maybe 2 students there. At 9, there'd be a few more. At 10, there'd be quite a few more, and by 11, pretty much everyone had arrived. And one of the reasons they didn't get there on time, at least that's what they told me, was that transportation. They had to rely on a very ineffective transportation system in the city of Salvador where I was teaching. But anyway, how do you get around? And then, of course, the issues of health and poverty. And that's something that a couple of companies that I deal with do address. So globalization is a topic that you covered, I think, a couple of weeks ago. And here I've listed some of the pros and the cons of globalization. Certainly we benefit from it. This morning as I was driving up to the campus, there was a guy on the corner selling strawberries and mangoes from Mexico. So I stopped to buy some mangoes. That's a positive benefit of globalization. I love mangoes, and we don't grow them. I mean, there are a few that grow down in Southern California, maybe Florida, but being able to access resources and the foods from all over the world in terms of going to Thai restaurants and just the great opportunities we have to consume goods that come from all over the planet. The fact that those goods are very inexpensive. If you look on the label of your clothing, my guess is that probably 80% of us are wearing clothing that's fairly inexpensive, that's been manufactured in Bangladesh or China or some other country in the world. And we benefit from that. And in the same way, people from around the world are benefiting from the access to technology. In 2001, I was a professor on the University at Sea. Have any of you been on that University at Sea program? Okay, put that on your to-do list. Something you can do when you're, I think, a sophomore. You get to travel on a cruise ship around the world. It's a one-semester voyage. We started in the Bahamas and then sailed to Cuba. And in each port, we stopped for a week, and I led a trip. In Cuba, we went and visited Matanzas and some of the cultural activities that were going on there. Then we went to Brazil, South Africa, Kenya, India, Malaysia, Vietnam, China, and Japan, and then back to Seattle. And you know, when I was in India, went to this tiny little village that just kind of a small dirt road, but there they had internet cafes, and that technology has really accessed the entire world, and in fact, India has become completely transformed because of that. I was working there first time I went to India was 1980. I was working for an organization called the International Center for Research on Women, and our job was to try and see how we could improve the status of women, the economic conditions of women in India, and traveling around. And at that time, I mean, there was virtually no technology there. We visited the city of Bangalore, which, you know, was, again, just a small commercial town. Today, it's a center, one of the world's centers of technology and manufacturing. On the con side, and your article, I'm not going to go into any depth, it really talks about all those other aspects. I have a little video which deals with this in a little more detail, so I think that's, can you show that for us?
Everything that we consume was produced by human labor, human hands. Whether it's farm workers who are working in fields, women working at sewing machines in Bangladesh or Indonesia sewing clothes, people who are just like us. The same things that we want for ourselves, we should want for them.
The biggest trade agreement that most people know about is NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. This is a pact that was supposed to create jobs for American workers by opening up a new export market in Mexico, and was supposed to raise living standards in Mexico by giving people new jobs and things of that nature. Instead, what we saw were hundreds of thousands of American jobs shipped to the maquiladoras along Mexico's northern border, and America has lost about 700,000 net jobs. There was this wave of subsidized corn and other grains from the United States. All of a sudden, it was more expensive to actually grow and sell your crop than it would be to buy it. That forced literally millions of farmers off their land.
These are really actually historically very stable communities.
Sino el hecho de que no puedes competir con compañías gigantescas, con transnacionales.
You know, these communities were not sitting at the table when the Mexican government and the US government decided that it was okay to let Archer Daniels Midland dump corn in Mexico at a price that was so low that those Mexican farmers were going to go broke.
Porque lo que más afectó fue a los negocios pequeños, a los rancheros pequeños, que son los que menos tienen y son los que más atacaron. ¿Por qué? Porque no tenían opciones.
A lot of the economic and environmental problems we're dealing with right now are the direct result of the North American Free Trade Agreement and similar trade deals. The Trans-Pacific Partnership would expand those economic and environmental problems massively. This is a massive deal that covers 40% of the global economy with the potential to impact easily half the countries of the world. The Trans-Pacific Partnership is going to affect our economy, our environment, our public health for generations to come.
Es triste ver que el abuso que hay de empresas grandes que tienen el poder de ponerle precio a tu trabajo.
A farmer that has an acre of land to plant a crop, it costs 80 cents to produce a pound of coffee. Sometimes the price will go down to 30 cents.
I fear that if the morality is not brought into the heart of the global trade, it will be human collapse. From the 90s to the present, when factories move out of the US, it goes somewhere else and enslave the people.
We have to think of a way to transform the industry. We have to use business principles for good to prove to the world that you can do business in a just way. You can do business to create more equality for people.
Free trade and fair trade might sound similar, but they're very different.
Fair trade is a movement of people, farmers, consumers, businesses, that aims at changing the terms of trade so that they become more dignified, more just, more equitable.
For us, it means that the farmers are democratically organized and have control over their lives.
They own that organization and they have much more leverage.
The pricing has to be fair.
The fair trade price sets a floor price, so it allows farmers to know from one year to the next what they can guarantee that they will make.
They will never sell their products below the threshold at which they would not be able to make a decent living. And that's very reassuring.
In addition, there's a community development premium or a fair trade premium, usually 5 to 10% of the cost of goods, that is paid into a fund that is democratically administered by the farming community for projects like clean water, sanitation, healthcare clinics, schooling.
If people get fair wages for their traditional knowledge, then they're more likely to preserve those knowledge.
I think a lot of times fair trade is a lie. Fair trade, like organic, has been completely watered down, and the essence of it has been taken over by people who are just trying to market things at this point. But underneath that, there are still people doing the actual real thing.
The thing that you want to do is look beyond that product and say, am I buying from a fair trade company, or am I just buying a fair trade product from a conventional company?
Researching the specific brand, finding out if they're talking about their farmers, they're talking about the people that are making their products on their website is a really great start.
A dedicated fair trade company is 100% fair trade. All their major supply chains are fair trade.
In fair trade, we don't sell and buy. We build long-term partnerships and friendship and commitment.
You've been growing organic cotton for 4 years. How has that changed? Has that helped you? Are you making money on it?
Enormemente, sobre todo, que nos ha sacado de la pobreza.
Bravo!
Thank you very much. Thank you.
With fair trade, you can place a vote with your dollars every day about the type of world that we want this to become. Not the world that we are, but the world that we should be.
Consumers who care and want to make a difference beyond the really important step of buying fair trade products, a couple of simple steps can go a long way.
I think we need to, number one, remember our history. People's movements have defeated similar corporate power grabs disguised as trade agreements.
Call your congressperson and let them know that you're concerned and let them know why.
We're already hearing from members of Congress that they're receiving hundreds of calls and thousands of emails. If enough of us get on the phone, send emails, it makes a real difference.
So that gives you, oops, whoa, hurt my nose. Do I control this, the volume? Okay, oh, sorry. Wasn't trying to scream at you there. So there you've seen a couple of the fair trade and good companies are indicated, Divine Chocolate, Alter Eco, Guayaki, which is located right here in Sebastopol. I'll talk about a couple other companies in a few minutes. You know, one of the points which, can we turn the lights down on the stage so that people can read that? So, you know, what my focus is in the business school is trying to change the way in which the next generation of business, or contribute to the changes of the next generation of business people is creating right now, and work with organizations such as BNet, which is the Beneficial Network, is a network of about 2,000 companies located in 35 different countries around the world that are all committed to the principles of good business. And what I mean by that is companies that are financially sustainable, because if you cannot produce enough product and sell it at a price which is profitable, you won't be in business. So the number one condition of being a good company is you have to be financially sustainable. Secondly, you have to sustain your people. You have to treat the employees well, give them fair working conditions and salaries, allow them a say in what goes on in the company. You have to sustain the community, because the community are the people who buy your products. If you don't give back to the community will not survive, and you won't survive either. Fourth, you have to sustain the planet. All wealth comes from the earth. If we destroy the earth, we destroy the basis of wealth. This is a concept which is lost on many of the large corporations, particularly in the extractive petroleum industry. And we need to sustain the world. And that means, as that last video that we just looked at, you have to think about how everything that you do has arms which reach around the entire planet. The product which we consume, the inputs which go into the products which a company produces may come from the other side of the planet. So if the people on the other side of the planet who are producing those products can't sustain themselves, then we have an unsustainable world. So you might say, well, what are the companies that are doing something like that? Well, one is a company just located down in San Francisco. It's called Kiva. How many people have heard of Kiva? Oh, good. Okay, so what do you know about Kiva? Anyone? Shout it out. Yeah. Great, yeah. So it's a direct person-to-person. So if you go on the kiva.org website, you can make a direct loan, as this couple here is making to that woman in Guatemala, to help her build her business. And you can loan as little as $25. You open up their website, and you'll find a list of maybe 500 different people or some of them are community groups from all over the world that are looking for a small loan, and maybe as little as $100 or $1,000 that will help them increase the size of their business and employ more people, be able to earn enough money to be able to send their children to school. It's a wonderful organization. I encourage you to take a look when you go home. Write that down on that piece of paper that I gave you, www.kiva.org, and go on their website and make a $25 donation if you can afford that. Actually, it's not a donation, it's a loan. You can get it back anytime you want. But I have several $1,000s that I just keep lending and lending again, and many people do that. So this is a good company located in San Francisco. One of my students a couple of years ago volunteered with Kiva went to Ghana for 3 months, where she went around and visited people like the woman on the left there to help them prepare their business plans and to vet the organizations that actually make the loans to those people in each of these countries. I could give a whole lecture just on Kiva. Another company which I love is called Vestergaard. I visited their headquarters in Switzerland a couple of years ago when I was doing the research for my book. And these boys, it's not a terribly good slide, I'm sorry about the quality of that, but they've got something in their hand with a plastic tube about 8 inches long. And what they're doing is they're thirsty. There's no bottled water in parts of Central Africa, and the water is all contaminated. So they need a drink. They can take this life straw, which is produced by Vestergaard France, and put it in the dirtiest water that you can find. It'll take out 99.9999% of all particulate matter, and will basically purify that water. That life straw is good for about a year. They have a larger unit which goes into a family's home. It's an interesting company. It started out by founded by Vestergaard Franson's father, who founded a company making uniforms for restaurant workers and so forth. And when Mikkel was about your age, he said, you know, I don't want to spend the rest of my life making uniforms. I want to go to somewhere where I can make a difference in my life. He went to Africa and he got involved in various trading operations, and he saw the lives that people lived there, and he saw so many people dying of needlessly of diseases, waterborne diseases, and tsetse fly and sleeping sickness and so on and so forth. And he said, you know, there's something, I've got to do something. And when he got back, he convinced his father, who is now the president of the company, to buy a shipment of surplus blankets, and they treated them and sold them to UNICEF, which distributed them in Africa, and it saved the lives of thousands of people who are getting bitten by insects at night and contracting terminal diseases. From there, they made bed nets. You know, it's like a net that you sleep under, keeps the mosquitoes from biting you. I always had one when we were living in Brazil, because I certainly didn't want to get dengue fever a second time. It's fatal. It can be fatal the second time. And so, you know, this really helps to save thousands of lives. And so it's transformed the company from one which is manufacturing clothing to one that's manufacturing life-saving devices for people around the world. TerraCycle, another interesting company. Yeah, go ahead. Let's take a look. I only think it's only 3 minutes. This is a company started by Tom Zaki, who started again about the same age as you. He was going to, I think, Yale or somewhere there, and saw the waste product that was all food waste, and he decided, I've got to make something out of this. So go ahead. Is that working?
We started TerraCycle 10 years ago as a concept to think about how we can look at waste differently. I mean, if you take a step back for a moment and just look at the very concept of garbage and waste, it's a very modern idea. It came about because basically we as human beings now make our objects from increasingly complex materials that nature doesn't know what to do with, and we consume phenomenal amounts of these materials, which drives our economy. But the key question that we've been grappling with over the past 10 years is, how do you recycle everything else? And it really comes down to innovative ways of collection, because if you think about it, even if you have an object in your hand that is recyclable, but there is no recycling opportunity, it will end up not being recycled. Now, some part of these materials can and are recycled at great rates, things like glass, aluminum, PET bottles, HDPE, and uncoated papers.
Just a little creativity, and everything can be thought about in a different way. I think one of the tricks to garbage is don't think of it as garbage. And if you don't think of it as garbage, it isn't garbage. It's just another raw material.
So the first aspect of any way to make non-recyclables recyclable is to create unique ways of collection.
Our collectors are the most vital aspect of our business. We have close to 26 million people sending us this waste. And that whole cost is funded by major consumer product companies, because they found that the public was craving a solution to their waste. We have certain schools in America that are raising, over $20,000 a year.
Old Navy and TerraCycle will select 4 deserving schools and give the playgrounds away for free.
TerraCycle has gotten kids involved in cleaning up the environment too. For every wrapper and juice pouch students pitch in, the company donates 2 cents to schools and charities. And for more of TerraCycle's story, you can check out Garbage Moguls.
On this Earth Day, we want to take a look at the future of environmentalists, eco-capitalism.
At a new eco-capitalist company called TerraCycle, whose motto is, there's no such thing as garbage.
A huge variety of items, such as cigarette butts, are collected in 90,000 locations across the world. the company, which has an annual turnover of approximately $20 million.
Once the waste arrives at TerraCycle, it is checked in, and our team of scientists and designers develop cool products and materials from each unique waste stream. TerraCycle will not incinerate or send any waste to landfill.
TerraCycle takes materials that are traditionally bound for landfill and invents ways of recycling them into valuable plastics. This plastic is sold to companies around the world to be turned into all sorts of brand new products.
We do this now in 26 countries around the world.
Our programs are further distinguished by our ability to promote your efforts and effectively engage your consumers. What we provide ranges from amazing publicity. Our brand partners have typically received hundreds of articles per year, to huge volumes of blogging on platforms from the New York Times to Tree Hugger, to robust social media.
Maybe we can start shifting our perspective to the way nature views waste, which is something of tremendous value. And instead of looking at waste as a way to get rid of a liability or get rid of an issue, why not look at waste as these valuable raw materials that are accumulating in our homes and see what we can then do with them from there?
So, can you turn this down a little bit? So what Tom Zaki didn't tell you was that the way he started, I think he was a sophomore in college, and he came from Canada down to study in New York, and he left his favorite plant in Canada. He didn't want to risk taking it across the border. The plant's name was Marley. And he left it with a buddy of his. When he got back, Marley had grown 10 times as big as he was. He said, what were you doing to Marley? He says, well, I was feeding him worm poop. And so he then started making worm poop with the garbage at his college, and that was the origin of TerraCycle. You can read all about it in his book. I really highly recommend that. But so there are solutions to the world's problems by people like you who take a really different look at business, looking at it as a way to solve the world's problems rather than to get rich and exploit other people. Indigenous Designs, another company that's located just a couple miles from here. How many of you have heard of Indigenous? Okay, not well known. It's not a huge company, probably about $30 million a year. It was started by these two guys in the picture here, Scott Leonard and Matt Reynolds. And I met up with Matt actually when he was about 5 years old. He was the son of my professor at Stanford. But little did I know at that time that Matt would go ahead and get into the clothing industry, where he was working in Europe as a clothing distributor for one of the large companies, and came back to a friend's wedding and met up with an old school chum of his, Scott Leonard, here in Sonoma County. And Scotty was importing sweaters from Peru, and they were, the ones that, used to buy on the streets. Danny probably remembers this, that, they scratch and one arm's a little bit longer than the other, and they sell for, $10, $20. And so what they did, and the people who were making them would make, $2 a day or something like that. And so he said about transforming what they did, the two of them. And so the women were sewing these sweaters with old bicycle spokes because they couldn't afford knitting needles. They provided them with knitting needles and good quality yarn, redesigned the sweaters for them. Today their sweaters, instead of selling for $10 or $20 in the street corner, sell for $200 through Eileen Fisher, which is another good company, by the way, or in Nordstrom's. And what they've done is they've transformed the lives of the thousands of people who sew those sweaters, built the market, And as you can see, some of the principles that they built this company on are in that slide there. You can write those down. This is a wonderful example, again, of how you can change the world, how you can influence what happens by setting out to do things the right way to build a good company. Our Vinay Hospitals is, and I'm not going to show that slide. We don't have enough time for that video. You can make a note of that and watch it. But this was started by a doctor in India, in the south of India, who saw that there was so much needless blindness in his country, and developed a model built on the model of McDonald's, believe it or not. He said, McDonald's, they break the work down into, each person does a little task. And so he said, well, we can break the work down of eye surgery into the preparation work, which doesn't require a doctor. So an eye operation, which in this country, to remove a cataract might cost $5,000 to $10,000, they do in India for less than $100. Of course, the surgeons do many, many more surgeries than an eye surgeon in this country. But what's brilliant about their model is that for every person who pays for an eye surgery, and the cost is around $50 to $100, they will give a free eye surgery to someone in need. And so they now have about 5 different hospitals in India and many more around other parts of the world. So this is, again, the idea of building a company that is not aimed at producing a profit, but it's aimed at helping people. I mean, we have hospitals in this country where the CEOs are paid millions of dollars. So Dr. V, who founded this, he said, I could made millions of dollars doing what I do, but instead I decided to make millions of spiritual dollars by building a spiritual company. And that's exactly what we need in this country. We need to change the attitude that more, for me, is good. And to change that in business to more for society is good. There's so many models. Traditional Medicinal is another company out in Sebastopol. The CEO, Blair Kellison, is a friend of mine. He's going to be our keynote speaker at the Sustainable Enterprise Conference on April 30th. I hope you can come to that and hear Blair. He'll talk about what they do. I take my students in my international business class out there each term to visit them. You can see the kinds of things they're doing. They're giving back to the people who produce their product. They source medicine. How many people have used traditional medicinal products? It's a great thing, like if you got a cold, if you take their cup of their tea. Their #1 selling product is called Smooth Move. So if you ever have that problem, I recommend it. Not from personal experience, but anyway, it's one of the things that's interesting was when they went out to, I think it's in Bulgaria, some people were workers there the company was having a hard time getting enough employees to pick I think it was licorice, wild licorice for their tea. And so I asked, well, why is that the case? Well, people can't afford housing. So the company actually bought houses for employees so they could rent them at very low rents. I mean, this sort of thing to really help people to improve their lives. Another company just down in Marin, Roots of Peace, what they do is they dig up landmines in Afghanistan and other parts of the world and plant grapevines. And the people then who do that work then have grapes, which they sell, make into wine. So, and finally, Bee Foundation. I love this. This is a company was founded by a student of mine. It's about 8 years ago. I was teaching at the University of Peace in Costa Rica. Any of you who are thinking of graduate work, let me tell you, suggest, write that name down, the United Nations University for Peace in Costa Rica. You can do graduate study there for less than it'll cost you to study here in the United States. And you'll be with about 200 students from 80 different countries around the world. Anyway, I was teaching a class there on leading social enterprises, and one of my students was Karen Mercado from Mexico. And so we were asking, well, who wants to be a leader? And Karen raised her hand and says, I want to be a leader. So we all went outside. It's an old coffee plantation, and we all sat around tables in groups of 4. Said, okay, so now we want you to develop your business plan, your leadership business plan. And so my son, who was 19 at the time, went along with me, and he was in the group with Karen. And so he says, okay, Karen, what's the company you're going to lead? He says, I don't know. I just want to be a leader. He says, now you got to have a company. What is it you're going to do? What's the organization? What are you going to create? What are you going to lead? So she thought for a minute. She says, well, you know, when I was a kid, I used to go with my mother, and she grew up in Cancun, to a little village where she was born, and we would take presents at Christmas time and give them away to the kids. And one Christmas, I was there with her, and this little boy came up and pulled in her dress and says, Senora, why you give us these gifts? And she says, well, to be nice. He says, Senora, we don't need these presents. She says, what do you mean? He says, I need to go to school. She says, well, what do you mean? Why can't you go to school? He says, I don't have a birth certificate. So what Karen discovered was that there are between 4 and 7 million children and people, children and many more adults in Mexico who don't have a birth certificate. If you don't have a birth certificate, you can't go to school. You need to show that. Why don't they have a birth certificate? Because they're born in a rural village. They have to go to the town, which might be 20 miles away. It costs money to get there. And they can't afford to do it. If their parents don't get the birth certificate within a period of 2 weeks, then there's a fine on top of that. And the fine can build up to as much as 6 months' salary. So consequently, they don't have birth certificates. She started B Foundation. She went back to Mexico. She started B Foundation and worked at this, got a couple of her friends together, and just a month ago, the Mexican government passed a law requiring every state to give all children birth certificates at birth. So she changed the way things are done in the world. Sorry, I've gone too long. So are some questions?
Yeah, so these are some of the questions
Okay.
from the students in the audience. So the first one is, how can SSU students do their part and get involved?
Well, there are many ways. One thing to get involved is come to our youth conference on May 2nd. We'll have about 100, 200 people, young people who will be meeting with leaders in the community and finding out ways in which you can do internships in organizations that are making the world a better place. You can also enroll, I think there are a couple, there's an entreprenoma course that's offered through the School of Education and I think the business school. I don't know too much about it other than this is a way in which you can actually create enterprises. You can go over to, you can also come and visit our office, the Sustainable Enterprise Conference office over at Sonoma Mountain Village in the iHub. So those are a couple things.
Does Sonoma State TerraCycle? If not, how can we start doing it?
I don't know. Does anyone know the answer to that? Good research question. Anyone know? So who wants to take that on? Here's a chance to be a leader, to be like Karen. Who wants to be Karen? The next Karen. Okay, I'll ask you again this afternoon.
Okay, what are some examples of bad companies, ones that exploit people and resources?
Well, let me turn that question back to you. Who can give me an example of a bad company? Yeah. Monsanto. It is listed as the worst company in the world. It's been voted the absolute worst company in the world. Any others? Hershey. Why is Hershey a bad company? Right. Their chocolate's not fair trade. Anyone else? Okay. Chevron. I mean, anyway. Another question?
Which companies are most beneficial to donate to? Or which ones have you donated to?
Well, as I say, I go on the Kiva website frequently. Whenever my granddaughters come over to the house, we go on the website together, and they get to choose who we're going to help. I work with some nonprofits as well. I work with an organization that's called Bay Area Green Tours, and we do tours of good companies in the Bay Area. If anyone's interested, talk to me afterwards.
Okay, and then the last question is there a future in which fair trade is used by everyone everywhere?
Well, that's certainly our hope, isn't it? Europe is way ahead of us in this. In terms of the U.S., it's about maybe it's under 5% in terms of fair trade purchases. But in Switzerland, I mean, this is something that's been going for many years. In Germany, the figures, in England, the figures up to 20 and 30% of food products. Now, there are more and more products that are coming into fair trade. I think rice is one product that's been recently added to the list. Until the present, it's mainly been coffee and cocoa and sugar. But this is a challenge for your generation. It's a challenge for all of us to, there's an organization actually in San Francisco at the San Francisco hub, which is working to get fair trade clothing and certification there. So, and I'm working in the field. I have a book coming out in a couple months, which is on good companies in hospitality, tourism, and the wine industry. And so there are certification systems for hotels and travel, eco-travel, and so forth. So that's growing. So there are a number of ways in which the world is changing, and you are part of that change. So go and tell everyone that you know about what you heard today and about how they can change the world and make it a better place.